Thanks for joining us. I'm Gary Dingus. We're monitoring a court case out of Florida that's been generating a lot of attention. It's a rare instance where we have an on-duty police officer who's accused of shooting and killing someone. We're talking about former Palm Beach Gardens police officer Newman Raja. In October of 2015, he's accused of shooting Corey Jones, a stranded motorist. Now, the Palm Beach Post was the first publication to learn that through Corey Jones's phone records, he was actually on the phone with roadside assistance at the time that this whole exchange went down. Those recordings with the roadside assistance folks didn't come out until much later, though. We have with us two attorneys from the Palm Beach area who have heard those recordings. They reviewed them. We've got Michael Kugler. He is a former Palm Beach County prosecutor. He's now at the Cersei Danny law firm. And we have Darren Shull, who is a criminal defense attorney. Thanks for joining us, guys. I'm going to start with you, Michael. As a former prosecutor, tell me, how would you go about presenting this case to the jury to convince them without a doubt that Officer Raja was in the wrong here?
So I think what you have to look at originally is, what is Officer Raja doing at the time? And how is he acting as a police officer? And what would somebody in Corey Jones' position actually be looking at? And so when you look at the situation, you have Newman Raja, who's a police officer, but that's unbeknownst to Corey Jones. He drives up the wrong way on the southbound off-ramp from the interstate. He blocks in Corey Jones's car in a large white van, and he gets out of the car. He's wearing a t-shirt, he's wearing jeans, and he has nothing that in any way would identify him as a police officer to anybody that's watching. And so if you're looking at it from a standpoint of a person in Corey Jones's position, is it's 3 o'clock in the morning, it's dark, he's broken down on the side of the road, and somebody comes up in a big cargo van and jumps out of the car and then starts talking to him in an aggressive manner. And so you can see how a person in Corey Jones's position would certainly be scared in that scenario. Certainly Newman Raja had a lot of opportunity to prevent that from happening. Number one, he could have put on his vest or his badge to clearly identify himself as a police officer. Probably more importantly, and the safest way to have done this, is for Newman Raja to have radioed to police dispatch to say, I have what looks like an abandoned car here. I'm going to block it in. I need a remote, or I need a marked patrol car to come up with a police officer in uniform to investigate. And that would have been certainly the proper way to do this. But what you're looking at from a prosecutor's perspective is, it's not just what is the right way to do something and what is the wrong way to do something. What you have to prove as the prosecutor in this scenario is that the actions of Newman Raja were so reckless as to rise to the level of a disregard for human life. That's the big problem that the prosecutors have. And the best, I think, piece of evidence they have is this audio tape from roadside assistance put in combination with the 911 call when Newman Raja calls. The one thing that stands out to me from those calls is Newman Raja comes up, and when you first hear him, he's talking in a very aggressive manner. He is almost coming aggressively at Corey Jones, or at least that's how it sounds. And Corey Jones is somebody who was just sitting there trying to get a tow so that he could get his car away from that area and protect his drums that were in the car. That's the thing that stands out to me.
Okay. And Darren, tell me, as a defense attorney, if you were part of this defense team, what would you do in order to convince the jury that there's some reasonable doubt here?
Well, you have a proof problem here that Newman Raja didn't identify himself as a police officer. And with the recording, there's nothing in the recording where Newman is saying, I'm a police officer or I'm a cop. He's obviously not wearing any identifiable clothing, a badge, anything like that. So you have to look at this thing, to the jury, you have to look at this thing as if he was his own private citizen. Your own private citizen could have approached Corey Jones that evening. And in some parts of the country, maybe not South Florida, but there are people who will actually get out and help you if you're broken down on the side of the road. So he could have approached him as a private citizen, came up to the vehicle, then saw Corey Jones. Now, Corey Jones has a firearm. There's no doubt about that he had possessed a firearm. It was in his car. He had to have gotten out of the car with a gun. It is a 380 model Jimenez, a very smaller, cheap firearm that he had. And so if Newman Raja sees this, even as a private citizen, forget about him being a police officer, then you have a confrontation. Now, Corey Jones doesn't know he's a police officer, and Newman Raja, at least the physical evidence, doesn't point to Raja saying, I am a police officer. So what you really have is an armed citizen encounter where two people now have a firearm. So if Newman sees this gun that Corey has, he believes at this point that he may be shot and killed. He's doing an investigation of burglary activity. He's on duty. Obviously, he's in plain clothes. The car is parked there, the side of the road, on the exit ramp, right next to a hotel, right next to a large parking lot. Now, I don't know why he didn't say, look, I was investigating, maybe the vehicle was parked there because I was investigating perhaps burglary suspects who might be in the parking lot of the hotel, but he just says it was an abandoned car. So he gets there, he gets out of his car. Corey Jones sees him. Corey Jones now has a gun. There is a standoff, and now they're two armed citizens. So who wins this, basically? Well, it's the armed and trained police officer, because Corey Jones has only had that gun for 3 days. And according to his brother, he's really not familiar with it. In fact, when they found the gun, it still had the safety on. So if Corey Jones would have shot and killed Newman Raja, he could have very easily availed himself of the stand your ground defense, which has nothing to do with the justifiable use of force by a law enforcement officer, which, as I know, should be read in the trial, and what the defense team is hoping is read in the trial, because it's a lower standard. But really what you have, if you're going to argue to the jury, my argument would be this is a citizen-to-citizen standoff and a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. Nobody's going in here trying to murder or rob or kill somebody. It just escalated to the point where two people saw they had firearms. Mr. Jones, obviously, the way that Officer Raja had brought up his van up the wrong way up the ramp and parks in front of him, certainly he must have been very frightened, grabbed his gun in self-defense, got out of the vehicle, obviously, and is now there with another person who has a firearm, and Raja shot him. And Raja shot him because he believed he was going to be shot by this person who he knew nothing about. And so it's basically a classic stand your ground defense. Problem is, Raja's a police officer. He should have done things differently. That's why he's being charged, and that's why he's being prosecuted. But I would be arguing with the jury that this is, if you don't believe our client who said that he was a police officer, or you couldn't hear it because of the microphone on the phone, and maybe you couldn't hear that. But if you don't believe he identified himself as a police officer, then you can fall back to this is basically then an armed citizen encounter where he has the right in the state of Florida to defend himself with deadly force.
Good insights, guys, from both of you. Before I let you go, you've been monitoring things so far. How do you think it's going? What have you noticed? Let's start with you, Michael.
As I watched the opening statements, I think the biggest thing that stood out to me was the fact that it's clear that Corey Jones not actually had a firearm, but actually had the firearm out. And there's two reasons that tell me that. Number one, as Scott Richards had pointed out in his opening statement, Newman Raja, in his statement to investigators a couple hours afterwards while he's at the scene, says he sees something that he believes is a laser max, which is something that's a laser on the end of a firearm that looks like just essentially a red reflection on the end of the firearm. when the sheriff's office went to go disprove that, they actually proved that that is the scenario. And what it was the reflection of the red stoplight reflecting off of the front of Corey Jones's gun. I think that's significant because it shows you that not only did Corey Jones have a gun, but he had it out. The second thing is that Corey Jones was shot on the lower right side of his body. And the trajectory of the projectile brought the projectile from essentially below his right ribs up into his left shoulder. And what that tells you is Corey Jones's arm had to be up. And you can bet that the reason why his arm was up was because he had his firearm out and was pointing the firearm. The problem when you look at this entire scenario, I think what Darren said has a lot of truth to it. And I think it's a difficult issue for the prosecutors. But what the issue really is Newman Raja created this deadly scenario. He created a deadly scenario because he drives the wrong way on a street, blocks in a car, in a unmarked van in the middle of the night. And all he had to do in that scenario as a police officer was talk to somebody on the radio. And all he had to do if he was a private citizen, if he was concerned, was call the police department and say, I know there's been burglaries in the area, or, hey, there's a car that looks suspicious. Can somebody please investigate this? And had Newman Raja done that, this scenario never presents itself. And so I find that I'm in the scenario as a prosecutor of, yes, this is absolutely a deadly scenario with two citizens that each have firearms. But the only way that this could have been prevented was Newman Raja not taking the action that he did originally. And would any reasonable person as a regular citizen have done this? I think the answer is no. I don't know anybody that would have. I can't imagine anybody that would have. And so then you have to fall back on his police training. And when you look at his police training, the one thing that police officers are concerned about in any encounter like this is that if there's a person there, that person has a firearm, and that officer is concerned about getting home at the end of the day, rightfully so. And so if you're concerned about that as a police officer, what you're going to do is make sure that you have other units to back you up. And that is the reckless conduct that leads to this deadly scenario.
Okay, and Darren, what about you? What have you picked up on? What has caught your attention?
Well, he's charged, Norman Raja has been charged with 2 counts. The first count is manslaughter by culpable negligence with a firearm. They amended the information some months ago. And then he's also charged with attempted first-degree murder, which I don't think the second count's really going to fly. I believe the state's theory on that is that, there was shots fired after the first encounter. There was a total of 6 shots, 3 and then 3. And their theory on that second count is that he was shooting at him as he was running away. So that makes the attempted first-degree murder count. But I haven't heard any evidence that would support that scenario exactly from all the reconstruction experts that were called, for instance, at the motion to dismiss the stand your ground hearing. We really didn't hear about any kind of distance that had been traveled, whether he was facing Raja or whether he was looking away and running. There were 2 wounds in the back of Corey Jones's arm. As far as how those wounds got there, exactly what he was doing at the time, whether this was because he spun around and what was happening, we don't know that. And the shot that went through all the way through his chest, both his right and left lung, and tore through his aorta and lodged in his arm, well, that's obviously when Corey Jones faced Newman Raja. So at least we have that encounter. And I would take an educated guess that it's the first 3 rounds that killed Corey Jones, because they are very close together. And the closer you are to your target, the more likely it is that you're going to hit them. And I think the last 3 rounds were fired into the woods perhaps, but not attempted first-degree murder. If the prosecution's going to have a shot, from what I've heard, on convicting Newman Raja of anything, it's going to be the first count, which would be manslaughter by culpable negligence. But again, Newman Raja shouldn't be penalized because he's a police officer. You have to look at it again in the regular armed citizen encounter. And the jury should decide from that whether he's actually guilty or not, or whether he has that defense.
A case a lot of people are watching. Darren and Michael, thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
And you can, of course, get the latest updates all day, every day on the Palm Beach Post website, pbpost.com.